And welcome everyone to this webinar. We have a really interesting one, I think, talking about how the internet traffic is performing, what the operators, governments can do to try and improve things if they can. And we have a great expert for that. Before I introduce him and get right into it, let me just remind you, we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A where I will ask Shernon questions. Then we'll have 15 minutes where you can enter questions in the chat, and I will convey those and moderate that. And then we'll have 30 minutes, which is in some sense just an open mic, where Samantha will be moderating the session, and you'll have your opportunities to talk amongst yourselves or talk directly with Shernon about different issues. So just to introduce Shernon very quickly, you've all seen his bio. He's a Director of Caribbean Affairs and Development with the Internet Society. He's been with the Internet Society for several years, was previously with ICANN, and he lives on the beautiful island of Curacao. So we're really glad that he is with us today. So Shernon, thanks for being here. I'm just going to jump right into it. Be sure to unmute yourself so we can talk. I'm just going to ask just a starting question. How's the internet traffic changed during the pandemic?
Okay, first of all, Dr. Jameson, thank you very much for this invitation. I think I'm honored to do this, and it's not just about to present something, but I think we have also a key role to play in order to keep the, how do you call it, the internet up and running. So in that regard, thank you very much for your invitation. I think if you look basically what happens, most of the times when we talk about the internet, I think it's quite important for us to make a distinction what is meant with the internet. Because if I ask someone what is the internet, most people would answer things such as that's Facebook, that's Twitter, that's Google. But is that what I'm talking about? No. When we talk about the internet, we need to make a distinction on what we call three operational layers. We need to look at the infrastructure, the telecommunication infrastructure, be it wired, wireless, satellite communication, that's not important. We need to have a telecommunication infrastructure in place. And because without the telecommunication infrastructure, we cannot have internet neither. So we need to have the telecommunication infrastructure in place. And once we have that, then we go to the highest level. Then we go to what we call the domain name system. This is where, let's say, the global internet traffic is being routed. So we need to understand that. And once we have the domain name system in place, and then we go to the highest, let's say, level where we as human beings interact with the internet. And here you will find all the applications that I did mention before. So to answer your question, if I maintain that same structure, if we look, for example, at the application layer, because most of the times we as human beings, we use applications. We have seen, for example, with respect to video streaming or streaming video, of which, for example, video conferencing, including this Zoom meeting that we're having right now, is also included. We have seen an increase of up to 60%, so globally. So we have seen with respect to streaming video, all kinds of video, included this one that we're doing right now, 60%. If we look at general web traffic, where I did mention the domain name system, here we have seen like 40% increase. So people trying to get access to all kinds of websites, let's say on the internet, we have seen a 40% increase. We have seen also within the gaming, let's say industry, or people who are doing online gaming, we have seen let's say 75% increase, especially during peak hours. And if we look, for example, at social media, again, it depends where you are, in which country, what topics are hot or not. We have seen, for example, in Italy, where it is a hot zone with respect to COVID-19, we have seen an increase of 70% with respect to social media. In other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, on average, we have seen, for example, like 15 to 20%. But this depends where you are. If they are a real discussion, hot topics going on with respect to COVID-19, then of course you will see much more people are on, let's say, social media giving their opinion. We have also seen, for example, with respect to what we call distributed denial of service, basically what we call DDoS, where the bad guys or bad girls are trying to do the things on the internet. This has been also a great opportunity for them because now they have much more people online. So in this regard, we have seen 40% traffic increase from this, let's say, let me call them bad guys or bad girls. So that's basically what we have seen. And in addition to all these, let's say, increases that we have seen, we have also, let's say, seen some, let's say, decrease as well. For example, with traditional sport, given that you don't have all these sport activities going on, people no longer trying to get access to these websites. So in this regard, with respect to sport, for example, sport media, we have seen a decrease of almost 70%. So 69.4 to be more precisely. So that's basically what we have seen, especially with respect to the what I would call the internet traffic on the application layer.
All right, well, that's really interesting. Now, there's a lot of technology in there, and you're certainly an expert in it. And we don't have time to explain all of it here. If I wanted to find an economist-friendly explanation of all those things of how the internet works, where could I go and learn that? What would be your recommendation?
I mean, on our own website, internetsociety.org, you will find a lot of information because, of course, I didn't focus much on that because it's already in the bio.
Sure.
But Internet Society is focusing on, let's say, promoting the internet. We do three main things. The first one is to develop internet-related standards. You have all kinds of organizations out there developing standards. For example, the ITU-T, they develop what we would call telecommunication standards. If you're using a GSM phone, mobile phone, that's what we call an ETSI standard. And then when you come to the internet, then we have one particular standard body. It's called Internet Engineering Task Force, of which the Internet Society is the organization home. So here we develop all internet-related standards. So that's one of the things that we do. We focus on internet standards. The second one is we focus a lot on policy. And when it comes to policy development, it's not only, let's say, real internet-related, let's say, policy, but you will hear also our opinion on other topics such as freedom of speech, because we believe people should have access to the internet. So if it does have a given connotation with the internet, and then you will hear our opinion on that as well. And the last area that we are quite active on is what we call capacity building and education. And that's basically what I'm doing right now as well.
All right, well, thank you. So there are a lot of different pieces of the internet. And back when I was first getting involved in this, and probably before some of our audience was even born, you know, we were talking about this as a network of networks. And that certainly sounds like it's the case, that there's the backbone parts, there's the telecom infrastructure, you mentioned that. There's wireline and wireless, that performs differently. There's people's own Wi-Fi networks, their smartphones, their computers. All of these have to interact together. And they perform differently depending upon what kind of traffic there is. Streaming video needs something different to be optimized than email, for example, or for gaming. They all have different demands on the networks. So if you're advising operators, you're advising governments to try and understand where problems are when problems arise, how do you help them to understand what they should do, and what would be your advice to them?
Okay, all, for example, the services or application that you did mention, when it comes to the internet, they have one thing in common, and that's what we call the TCP protocol. That's a very fundamental piece that we need to understand when it comes to the internet. If you compare that with traditional, what I would call telephony. For example, the internet, if you look at the TCP protocol, what it does is the internet is the business of routing traffic from one network to the other. As you did mention, the internet is the networks of networks, interconnection of networks. So you need to route traffic from one particular network and the other. And the internet, what it does, the only language that it does speak is the TCP protocol. So all the services that you did mention, all of them are based on the TCP protocol. So in fact, it doesn't matter what kind of service you would like to provide, if it is data, voice, email, or whatever, all of them in one way or the other has to speak that particular language. The challenge that we are seeing, it doesn't have to do with the internet, the global internet infrastructure. It has most of the times to do with what we would call, let's say, the last mile. For example, operators, they didn't dimension, for example, their infrastructure to deal with given number of traffic increase. A good engineer, those who are focusing on network development, most of the times they keep or they take into consideration, let's say, a traffic increase of 40 to 50% without any problem. So that is why, if you look at the global internet right now, it didn't have any problem. I mean, the internet didn't crash. It's still working because the global internet, it's there. The problem that we may have problem at the operator, but that's something different, you know. So they need to do their job in order for us to keep, in order for them to provide services. So an advice to operators, I think it's very important for them to be engaged with their colleagues, with their peers, to talk with others, to see how they have been solving problems or challenges in other parts of the world. Because the challenges that they are facing, most of the times it's not something new. Someone else already did solve that particular problem. And with respect to regulators, I think it's also very important for them, especially right now with COVID-19 challenge that we are facing, for them to understand how, let's say, the internet functions. And also, for example, to look at smart ways how they can provide services to the community. So maybe they can, let's say, issue some new spectrum to operators in order for them to give better service. So these are the things that regulators can take into account if they would like to provide, if they would like to help their community.
All right, one more question before I go to our chat feature. So if you're a regulator and you receive concerns from the citizens, and the regulators in this moment are really focused on good service for citizens, and that's, I think, is exactly the right thing to do. And the citizens are saying, you know, let's just say Netflix, for example, my Netflix is going really poorly. I think my telecom operator is doing a bad job. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem could be in Netflix's own private mm-hmm. internet. It could be in the customer's Wi-Fi. It could be in the customer's computer. It could be the local internet service provider or something else. Mm-hmm. How do you explain that and help the customer figure out where the problem is?
I think, first of all, if you look at the internet, what internet service providers do, they give you access to the internet. You know, it's a pipe. They give you access to the internet. But I mean, if you have what I would call like, I'm not sure if that's the right the right way to say it, but if you have a very low data plan, no, if you have a very low data plan, how do you expect if all, I mean, everybody's now at home, they're using, all of them are connected. So how do you expect the network to perform, because what you're getting from your internet service provider is just a very narrow pipe. So you cannot expect, let's say, for you to do all the services that you would like to do. You need to upgrade your plan maybe. And this is also one of the measures that we have seen that operators, especially in the Caribbean, have been taken. They are giving, let's say, customers more, let's say, data, bit rate, and those kind of things, in order for them to get a much better internet experience. But I continue saying, again, this doesn't have anything to do with the global internet. The focus is still locally in your house. If you have, let's say, 20 children in your house, all of them trying to access the internet, then you can feel maybe your router cannot deal with that. You know, so these are the things that we need to take into consideration. This will become then the bottleneck, but it doesn't have anything to do with the global internet infrastructure. So that's the point that I would like to make.
Okay, well, thank you. And if I had 20 children in my house, my internet would probably be the least of my problems. But I appreciate that. Thank you. So let me turn to our audience now. The first question is going to be from Alaji, and I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. What Alaji's asking is given the steep increase in traffic, all these various categories, and they all behave differently, what strategies or actions should service providers be using to manage that sharp increase?
You know, generally speaking, service providers, internet service providers, they have their particular community. I have been attending these kinds of events as well, where they discuss the challenges that they're facing. So that is why I know that this is not a real problem to them. It's just an engineering issue. The network was not well dimensioned. So you need to go back to your drawing board and make the network more resilient in order for it to deal with the number of traffic increase that we are seeing. So I keep saying, because people might think, okay, the internet is going to break. No, the internet is not going to break. The thing is, you need to do your homework, especially engineering on the local level, to ensure that you can still provide internet services.
All right, so falls to the engineers, and sounds like the engineers are up to the task. Mm-hmm. Just get the right equipment, get the right software, get the right people working on it, and it's all solvable.
Yes.
All right, very good. So our next question is from Catherine. And Catherine was very interested in the statistics that you were quoting. Wants to know where she could find those. That's a great question, because I've written now 2 papers on the internet and the pandemic, and you get different statistics from all kinds of different places. What are the good, reliable sources that give people a good picture of what's going on?
Yes, again, I don't want to promote much our own organization, so that's not what I'm doing here. But again, if you go on our own website, I have one colleague who has been focusing a lot on research, and a lot of these data that I did mention came out of his blog. So if you look, if you just search, for example, Internet Society, is the internet going to break, or something like that? I'm not sure if that was the right wording. And then you will find a lot of these statistics that I did mention. And in his blog, he also made references to some other, let's say, authors who did some research on this as well. So this is basically Internet Society. But you can also look, for example, at ICANN. ICANN is one of the organizations that, let's say, measures, let's say, global internet traffic. They have some good statistics as well. It depends where in the world you live. For example, if you would like to get some data from your country. For example, if you are in Africa, then you can search, for example, at Afrinic, let's say, website, because they do a lot of research in Africa. If you are more in Asia Pacific region, then you can search more at APNIC. If you are more like, let's say, in the US, then you can look at ARIN. If you are in Latin America and part of the Caribbean, you can look at LACNIC. So they do a lot of, let's say, research regionally, and then you can get a better sense what is going on in our region. But if you would like to get a better, let's say, global understanding, I think Akamai is one of the sources that can help you a lot in that regard.
All right, thank you. So we also have a question from Emmanuel. Emmanuel's from Ghana and said that there's pressure on the service providers in Ghana to lower prices, keep the prices low. In Sino, in the Caribbean, other places, people are actually doing this for free, connecting customers that have not had the internet connections before. And the operators are concerned that this will really overwhelm their networks. So what kinds, and you've said that this can be resolved, but if you're the regulator, what kinds of conversations should you have with the operator to kind of come to a common understanding of what the real challenges are and what the real solutions are?
Yes. I mean, I used to work at the regulator as well, like 10 years ago. So I know these kinds of discussions. And to answer Emmanuel, for example, at the end of the day, someone has to pay for this, you know, because you can't tell, for example, an operator just to provide everything for free, but they too have to find a way how they're going to deal with all the costs that they have. And I think if all of us come together in that particular room and we believe this is something that we can do for our country, I'm sure they will find smart ways how to do this. I don't believe there is one solution that you can just say this is the way how you should do it, because I know, especially in the Caribbean part of Latin America as well, we have had some, let's say, smaller ISPs, not the big ones, but the small ones. They have been going through very, how do you call it, challenging times, because they have a small operation, and if you tell them they cannot charge their customers, they will go out of business, you know? So I think these are conversations that we need to have locally, and then to see what would be the best solution for that particular case. But I don't believe you can just say, okay, this is what all of them should adhere to, because I'm sure, and I've seen it, some of them, especially the small ones, they will go out of business.
All right, very good, thank you. So we also have a question from Adamu. Now, Adamu is asking, saying there's a change in the pattern of internet traffic. And so there's a shift in when the peaks are, the shift, time of day, weekends, whatever. We're seeing this kind of change. Is you're looking at this, as you look at this change, do you see this as a new pattern or just an anomaly during the pandemic? How do you think traffic is being permanently affected? So
basically, all the statistics that I did give, they are, let's say, what we have seen after, I mean, as soon as we have reached this whole COVID-19 thing. So that is why I have been, it's more like, how do you call it? I did mention, for example, increase, because in an increase of 75%, that's, before that, we didn't have that, you know? So all the statistics that I did give, they are based on the current situation that we have right now. We have seen, for example, I think one that I did mention, gaming, for example, within the gaming industry, 75% increase. That's mostly during peak hours, and also during the weekends, because people are at home. I mean, all of us in one way or the other are at home right now, but people are at home, they cannot do anything, so they need to find a way how to keep themselves busy. And they have been focusing on the gaming industry. So that was like the 75% to answer Adamu's question, I think. So yes. That's basically during the peak hours. If you look at social media, that's on average, because people are on Facebook and other let's say, social media platforms during the whole day. So this doesn't change much. With respect to the denial of service, DDoS attacks, that's also across during the whole day, we see that same pattern going on. So with respect to streaming, video streaming, mostly for business purposes, we see this during the day because now people are moving to Zoom and other platforms to still conduct their video conferences. And the other streaming services, video on demand, that's mostly, let's say, during night hours, people watching Netflix and other kind of services.
Right, so you mentioned earlier about the increase in traffic from bad players. So what is the best thing, or what are the kinds of things that operators, government officials are trying to protect consumers and protect the internet from those bad players?
Basically, when you look at the internet does have two main components. We have what we call the names, the domain names. For example, jameson.com, that's a domain name. And we have what we call the routes to go from one network to the other. So, and these bad guys and girls and others, what they're trying to do, they are trying, for example, to, when it comes to names, for example, nowadays, given that people would like to get a solution with respect to COVID-19, they may offer you a solution. I mean, although we know there is no vaccine right now with respect to COVID-19, but still there are people there thinking, okay, when they see something on the internet, that should be something legitimate, you know? So they click on that particular website. And there is basically where the problem starts, because you click on that website, you believe it is a legitimate website, but behind that you have all these hackers asking you for maybe your personal information, credit card or whatever, and then, I mean, you know what the result is. So that's with respect to domain names. And a lot of them, in one way or the other, they attach, for example, COVID-19 to that. So whenever you see something COVID-19, you may think, okay, this is something legitimate from a research or whatever. You click on it, and then you get yourself into trouble. In addition to the names, we have something else on the internet, and this is the routes, for example, the internet routes, because you need to route your traffic from one network to the other. And then here also, you may have people coming with some measures online to, in order for you to reach the network that you would like to reach, to come precisely or exactly to their particular server, you know? So what we're seeing globally, there are two, as I did mention, two types of focus of these guys, bad girls are focusing on. They're focusing on the names and they're focusing on the routes. Technically, we do have solution for both. For example, for the names, we do have something called domain name system with security extension. And then it may help a bit. For the routes also, we do have something called RPKI, Research Public Infrastructure, very technically. But it ensures that when I go, for example, from network, if I'm a network, or if Mark is a network, and I would like to go to another network, let me see in the chat there, Michelle, for example, and then I ensure that when I leave Mark, I get to Michelle, and then I don't get to, for example, the Jasmine, for example. So that's the way how they're trying to protect the routes, that people can have the assurance that when I leave a given network that I reach the other one. And when it comes to names, when I try to get Jameson.com, I would like to be sure that I reach to Jameson.com and not to Kathleen.com, for example. So that's the way, the two big areas that we have.
Okay, thank you. One more question, then I'll turn things over to Samantha to moderate. I'm working with some researchers here at the university, and they're very interested in misinformation issues. How misinformation on the internet, perhaps especially during this time, affects individuals, affects companies, affects the internet itself. And so they're just kind of getting started into the research. What have you seen with respect to misinformation, and what do you think those impacts are?
Talk about misinformation. This was, I didn't really want to touch it, but given that you mentioned it, let me still touch it. This is
just a little bit then.
Yes, this is this whole connotation between 5G and COVID-19.
Sure.
So I think, let me put it like this. Let's do our research, because still we don't have much, let's say, data on that particular topic. But if you know how radio frequency work, you know, and if you look at the discussions going on, I think this is a real misinformation where we need to do a lot on it. And we have seen some sabotage going on, especially people seeing, for example, operators deploying 5G. They are committing sabotage against their antennas, these kind of things. So I think, talk about misinformation, I agree with you. This is one particular area that I think in this regard, the university, you can do a lot of research on this, because the globe needs to have some more tangible information on this. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Shernon. Samantha, I'm going to turn things over to you to moderate from here on.
Thank you, Dr. Jameson. So yeah, so during this time, if anyone would like to share any of their stories, we would love to hear from you. So in the chat section, please feel free. Again, you can submit comments there. However, if you'd like to raise your hand to do so on your laptop or desktop, you go to the participant box on the toolbar, and then along the bottom of the Zoom screen, and just raise your hand, and then I'll go to you. And like I said, I'll be happy to share your audio, and you can choose to share your video if you'd like. If you're on a cell phone, it's the same thing. It's in the participant field, and you have the option to raise your hand along the toolbar at the top of the screen. So yeah, so we'll just wait here now, and if anyone would like to share, please feel free to do so now. Thank you.
So no one has their hands up yet? All right, until they raise their hands, I'll have some more questions. They'll get tired of me, then they'll raise their hands. So this question actually comes from one of my colleagues here at PERC, Araceli Castaneda. She's interested in knowing, you work with both operators and regulators. What do you wish that the operators understood about the regulators? And what do you wish the regulators understood about the operators, so that we could do well in dealing with the internet performance and the pandemic?
Yes, I think the great thing is I've been at both, so I understand the regulators and the operators as well. Most of the times, I mean, they're talking two different languages, you know, so it's a challenge sometimes for them to understand this. And especially with regulators, traditional regulators, let me call it like that, most of us came from, let's say, the old traditional telecommunications world. So that's something that we understand quite well. We know exactly how telecommunication infrastructure, let's say, function, those kind of things. But when it comes to the internet, it's something completely new. People don't understand this thing called the internet. What is it? You know, you don't have globally one regulator that is dealing with the internet. What we are seeing is more like what we call collaboration between, let's say, a group of 6 groups of stakeholders. So none of them are in control, you know, and this is something that especially regulators, they cannot understand this, because someone should be in control, but the internet doesn't have a global regulator. It does not. What we have is more people collaborating, and what we have seen is that when people in a voluntary way collaborate with each other, they reach, this is real life, yes? I'm just doing this off, yes. So when they collaborate with each other, they reach much more than when you are forced to do something, you know? So I would say try to get a better understanding with respect to the, what we call the internet ecosystem. And once you know that, I mean, a lot of things will become much more clearer how to deal with the internet that we have in.
All right. Samantha, anyone have their hand up yet?
We do not know. Don't be shy, everybody. We'd love to hear from you.
Adam Moo's applauding. Does that qualify as a hand raising?
Yes, Jamal, thank you so much. I've been trying to see, using the Zoom to see if I can raise up my hand, but I didn't quite to see where I can do that. Thank you so much for this interesting session. I find it very, very interesting to meet gentlemen across the world to share experience. I'm recently calling from Nigeria. And from what we have seen this huge traffic growth, the kind of traffic that we have never anticipated to have during this COVID-19 crisis. But from the intervention that we have done a lot of capacity upgrades on our access links, which Sharon has already mentioned, the last mile capacity dimensioning. So that dimensioning has also been done, and in some areas where we have fiber penetration, we're able to support traffic on that. And then on the radio access, we have to approach the regulatory, similar to what is happening in the United States by Verizon, asking FCC to grant them some temporary spectrum. So for us also in Nigeria, we have done a similar thing, to ask for additional spectrum on 800 megahertz to increase capacity of our 4G. Our majorly traffic is still on 3G. Most of our subscribers is during this session that we have seen a lot of people using our 4G technology. So I don't know whether if in other part of the world that thing is similarly happen. And I know that we're still learning on a lot of things during this period of COVID-19. So it's still a learning curve for all of us, the operators who are redimensioning, they are investing, like Verizon is investing up to $18 billion to strengthen their infrastructure in the United States. So in Africa, it's also the same thing. Operators too are getting more funds to add additional infrastructure to support more traffic. This is my contribution. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Shernon, do you have anything to comment on there or to add to?
Yes, basically what he did mention, I'm not sure I got the name, but for example, I also did mention, for example, the spectrum, that's one of the things that we are promoting as well, especially to see some relief with respect to more people getting, let's say, online, those kind of things. So I endorse completely everything that he said. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Samantha, Kathleen posted a question, but could you unmute her and let her ask directly, please?
Sure, absolutely. Kathleen, you're unmuted now. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Shernon. Basically, my question is based on the question that was posed from the gentleman from Ghana. He indicated that the government is trying to get internet at zero or little cost. And as you said, there is a cost for providing the service. And as I said, that's a given. We accept that. But how do you balance the need for students to now take courses online and also for people to have access to basic information with regards to the health alerts and other government alerts that are important and critical for them to survive?
Yes, I think, thank you, Kathleen. Great to see you there. if you look, for example, within the telecommunication industry, for years we have, let's say, been collecting what they call the universal service funds, you know, and I've seen reports, for example, in Africa, parts of the Caribbean, and Latin America as well, where a lot of these agencies, they have a lot of this money that they have been collecting during the years, and they haven't, okay, let me rephrase. The money is there, you know, so the money is there. Sometimes it's not there, but most of the times the money that has been collected during the years for universal service provisioning, it's there. And I believe maybe now is the time that we can discuss with these authorities. I mean, the money is there. It has been collected, for example, for us to deploy services in rural or underserved areas. We haven't done it. So now we have, for example, these youngsters, they are at home. They need to get internet access, as you did mention, Kathleen. So maybe we can use these funds to develop new infrastructure, or maybe to give them access or computer, whatever they may need. So I don't know the answer neither, but I'm just thinking what can be done. And given that globally, on average, we still have a lot of funds there that never was used for what it was intended to be used. So I think that's one thing that we can see what we can do with that.
Thank you.
Then Brian Carter has a question.
Yes. Hi, Brian. I've unmuted you. Can you hear us? Brian?
Well, maybe let's move on to Michael Moore then.
Sure. Hi, Michael. I've unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Just a second. Yeah, I can now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry about the background noise. I've got another one running in the background. All right. The question I had was, are there any of the areas in the long haul system with all this increase in traffic that we've seen in the different categories that Shernon, you pointed out, we saw the upticks because of the COVID. Are there any of these areas that are have hit maximum capacity, or is the overall network whole and good? Or alternatively, are there areas that surprisingly are underutilized that might indicate an opportunity for expansion and growth in areas where there's a lot of network capacity but very little use, or not experiencing the uptick in use that everything else has? So 2 questions.
Yes. So basically, we have seen, and we did receive also some requests from what we call the internet exchange points. In the Caribbean, 2 for sure, 2 IXPs did approach us to help them to upgrade their infrastructure.
Right.
As I did mention, normally, if they didn't have any problem, they should not have been a problem neither. But okay, they are taking advantage of this, given that we are working with, let's say, vendors and donors and others also to, let's say, to promote more resilient infrastructure. Right. So in that regard, we will be assisting them as well. But as I did mention when I started this whole conversation, if you look at a daily job of, let's say, a network engineer, this is the things that we're looking at. I mean, they should forecast, okay, what can we expect? But of course, COVID-19, it was not something that none of us could have thought about. Right. So to answer your question, yes, we have seen some who did reach, I'm not sure how you did mention it, some of them that need, let's say, to increase their capacity, and we are trying to help where we can. We got 2 requests from the Caribbean, as did mention, and we are helping them in that regard. For other, let's say, international guests that we have, not from the Caribbean, from my region, we do have similar programs across the world as well. So if you are in Africa or Asia Pacific, whatever, we do have some programs in place where we assist especially internet exchange points or internet service providers to help them to upgrade their infrastructure as well.
Right.
So you can approach me, and then I can get you in contact with my colleague in those regions.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Brian, is Brian back now?
It doesn't seem to be working. Brian, can you hear us?
Well, I can ask on behalf of Brian then.
Okay.
Brian was wondering if you could describe, Shernon, work you're doing in the Caribbean to assist regulators, and have your day-to-day activities changed with the pandemic?
Okay, let me start with the last one. Yes, it did, because most of the times we were traveling all the time, you know. So if you look at that did change. We have been focusing a lot on webinars nowadays as well. This is one, for example, that we are doing. Working in Latin America and the Caribbean, assisting, for example, with assisting or working with other organizations as well, such as Canto, CITEL. So what we're doing right now is to raise awareness with respect to resilient infrastructure. And in the Caribbean, Brian, we do have an additional challenge as well, and that's what we call the natural disasters. We're going within 1 month to start with, let's say, the storm season. And just imagine what would happen if we start to get all these storms and we still didn't finalize this whole COVID-19 thing. So it's going to be very disastrous. So we don't even want to think about it. So what we're doing right now is to raise awareness, talking with regulators, operators, organizations such as Canto. I'm on that committee as well. Brian, you're there as well. So we are raising awareness to more resilient infrastructure. So that's basically what we're doing in the time being. We have also learned something very important. I think I have been focusing on that during this whole session. The power of the internet. Just imagine if we didn't have the internet. We have the internet, it's there. Still, we are able to communicate with each other through the internet. But this is not the case with all of us. Still, 48% of the globe is not connected to the internet. So it's now 52% is taking advantage of everything that's taking place right now. But we should not forget 48% out there, they cannot do what we have been doing during this pandemic. So we need to think about them as well and to see how we can help them as well.
All right. Okay, so we have a question from Denise Simmons.
Denise, you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Good
Great,
morning. Thank you for this very engaging talk. I've been taking in much of this and making lots of notes. My question is, how do you characterize resilient infrastructure? And because I'm slightly familiar with some characterization of that, and it might be fairly broad, the second part is, what must be focused on immediately?
Okay, to start about resilient infrastructure, if you just look at the definition of the word itself, I mean, we will get the answer about that. But when I'm talking about resilient infrastructure, most of the times, of course, we maintain that same definition, but we are looking how these networks are, how do you call it? How they are designed, you know? If you look, for example, let me talk a bit now for the Caribbean. We know that we can expect, let's say, hurricane category number 5 in the Caribbean, 4, 5, 3. I'm not going to mention any particular country, but we have seen, for example, in one of those countries where we can expect hurricane category number 5, they were using these towers, category number 2. So basically, you're asking for trouble, because you know that when we get a hurricane, those infrastructure cannot withstand, I mean, all the strength of these winds and these kind of things. So these are the small things that we are doing. We are working with operators in this regard. Listen, guys, we know it is expensive, but just imagine if you don't have that infrastructure in place, it will be much more expensive for the whole country to come back to speed if you have just, let's say, executed a well-designed infrastructure. You know, so these are the things. I mean, there are things that we cannot work on, but these small things, as I did mention, a tower, this is not something that should happen because we have best practices how to deal with that. With respect to resilient infrastructure as well, with respect to the internet itself, we are focusing a lot on getting what we call caches on the islands. For example, a couple of years ago, when we had the hurricane in Haiti, the locals were still able to continue to communicate through the internet exchange point. So until everything collapsed, but for a good amount of time, they were able to communicate locally. And we have learned that when we talk about resilient infrastructure nowadays, we are focusing a lot on internet exchange points as well, because this is one of the mechanisms that, let's say, stakeholders, local stakeholders, be it government, operators, and all of them can use to develop a local economy. Government, for example, can put, for example, cash or whatever, an e-government cash on these IXPs, and they can keep their local information local that they have to share with their citizens. So these are the things that we can think about, and not just to develop an IXP, but how can we develop a whole internet economy around that? You know, that's basically what we're trying to do. And your second question,
Is there time? I don't know. Mark was keeping track.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Very good. The second question was, I'm very much concerned about sort of a holistic look. What's the role of the public in resilient infrastructure?
Again, it's all about raising awareness, because a lot of people, I mean, we know what the consequences are for not having resilient infrastructure, but most people don't really care when it comes to, let's say, telecommunications or internet infrastructure. So, but when you start to explain them these things, these very simple things, and that we need to keep connected in one way or the other, it can save lives. And then they're starting to get a better understanding why we are promoting this, and then we start to seeing the shift. But I believe still a lot need to be done, and we are doing this with other organizations as well. Kanto, for example, is doing great work in this regard, and others are doing this as well. So this is one of the things that we are promoting or doing.
Thank you so very much.
Welcome.
All right, so thank you, Shernon. I'm not seeing any other questions, Sam. So let me just thank Shernon. Thank you for all the participants for being here. Really great discussion. I was very pleased with how everyone's able to dig into the details and try to understand this deeply.